And our last fallacy is the false dichotomy. This one is, again, like all the other fallacies, it might not be a bad argument in some circumstances, but once again, the circumstances are key to interpreting what's going on here. But in general, the false dichotomy is exactly what the name of it tells you. There is a dichotomy, and it's a false one in that there are more options, dichotomy being two. So false dichotomy is presented with two options. Here's a simple example. Either it will rain or be extremely hot. It won't rain, therefore it will be extremely hot. Now this, of course, that's a valid little argument, right? So once again, fallacies can be valid. There's no problem there. They can. So it's wrong to say that a fallacy can't be an argument. Yeah, fallacies don't all appeal to emotions or whatever. That is one example. But a fallacy is a broad category. But wait a second. The false dichotomy is simply that you're saying rain or extreme heat. What about cloudy and cool? So there are other options than what are presented here. So again, perfectly valid, but is it sound? Well, you'd have to look at it and say, no, there's other options. This is important. People can either confuse themselves and bad reasoning and trap themselves by thinking they've only got one or two options or whatnot when there's more, and then make a decision based on one of those two options and not consider a third. So fallacies can they can easily ruin parts of our own lives if we don't see other possibilities. So the false dichotomy arbitrarily shrinks the possibilities down to two. This is often used in politics, for instance. You probably noticed I wrote this one. Vote for me or civilization will end. Maybe that's the case sometimes. I'm not sure, but I suspect more often than not, there are more alternatives than that. And in that sense, you can really shape and really sort of force people to think in the way you want if you can at first, as this fallacy suggests, eliminate other possibilities that you don't want and then force them only to consider the possibilities that you do want. That's an example of using this false dichotomy. It could be a false trichotomy, right? Instead of a dozen options, you give three. And they're the three options that you want, and you want people to pick one of them. So you force them into picking one of three that you want. Again, it's still a fallacy, but the argument could be sound. So what we've learned is, remember, just because an argument's valid doesn't mean it's good. Even if it's sound, still doesn't mean it's good. So this is important in your own writing so that you don't set up arguments that only have two options or three options, and then you act as if those are all the options. Because I will point out, you're catching, you're either deliberately promoting or unintentionally being caught in a fallacious form of reasoning. But again, it does turn on the circumstances, because sometimes there might only be two options. So, but then it's not a false dichotomy because there actually are only two, and you got to pick one of them. No, that could be other things like a dilemma. If both options are terrible and you've got to pick one, that's a dilemma. That's not a false dichotomy because the dichotomy is real. It's accurate. Remember, the false dichotomy is, as the name says, it's a false dichotomy. There are more options. So don't be tricked whenever people present, just a small amount of choices or options, an option set. Ask yourself, are there more? And also when you're doing your own writing, make sure you don't take a very complex situation and then say there's only two options, and then you destroy one and then you get your own and then act as if, well, this was a good argument. No, it could be an example of fallacious reasoning.